All right, we are live on Facebook and we're recording. This is another sports science talk that Ted Griouard and I are having, and focused on triathlon. But this time we're going to focus in on running and stride frequency. Ted, how's it going?
It's going really good. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It's honestly dear to my heart. I've changed my stride frequency many times to different cadences, and I've often thought about it. And as you know, I've worked with many athletes, and that's actually one of the variables that we can change, and we can change in my opinion, relatively easily. Yeah. There's lots of variables in running, and some are really easy to change and some are really difficult to change. I think this is one we actually can mess around with a little bit, whether we should or not. I mean, we'll talk about that. So
no, that's awesome.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. And yes, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart as well. And now I gotta say, I don't coach running. And I used to coach swimming a long time ago, but I'm not a coach. And so my perspective of stride frequency comes from the research end. Yeah. And what's interesting is I got into my graduate work because of endurance sports, trying to, get faster in a triathlon. Then along the way got hurt and had to explore running in the water. And that took me down a path of understanding running style and running biomechanics and running physiology. And that led to going up to my doctoral work up in Oregon, where I followed up with some studies on running, and eventually started down at UNLV, and I've been doing running related research since really about 92, 93. Right. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but we talked before this, and I just pulled me back from the weeds because we've done a lot of research on this topic. And
there's so much depth. And actually, I think that for our members, one of the most difficult things when you look at this and you look at the research is there's, 1,000 articles that are relevant.
Yeah, easily.
And that's just talking about humans. You get into and a lot of the research is animal models and a lot now even robot modeling.
Yep.
And there's so many opinions on this topic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You look at, not even just research, but you look at just opinions from high level coaches.
Yep.
And, and that's actually something that one day we should actually probably talk about, John, is, and maybe not today, but the art of coaching and the science of coaching. Yep. Right. And how those sometimes do this. Yep. And where are we supposed to be? So let's start out, John. I know that you've prepared something for us, but actually one of the things I want to mention is you mentioned your swimming background. Obviously, cadence plays into swimming as well.
That's right.
Cadence plays into cycling. So it plays into everything, and this just happens to be we're talking about running today.
That's right. It crosses over in each of the sports. And funny, actually, I was reading some information on thoroughbred races, race horses, and some of the work there. It does cross over into comparative biomechanics, especially, and it's a fun topic. So let me share my screen, and hopefully my computer doesn't crash. And see if this works. All right. So, are you seeing my PowerPoint presentation?
Yep. Okay. Absolutely.
All right. So like I said, I've done a lot of work on running, and one of the basic key kinematic descriptors of running is stride frequency, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about why it matters. I'll talk a little bit about the science of it, and then maybe why it doesn't matter. And then you, as a coach and doing some different things, this would be a fun conversation.
Well, and I took a lot of this off of research on injury.
Yeah. That's right.
That's one of my areas that I'm really interested in, is how can you manipulate running to preserve people so they don't get injured. And one of the areas that there's a lot of research on is actually stride frequency and stride length. So this is going to be perfect. So John, I'm going to slow you down already, because you used a term that many people may not know. What's kinematics?
All right, so thank you. Kinematics is just the study of motion. It's what things look like, how you describe movement. And
Perfect.
I'll use the term running style, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, and how we quantify some of the aspects of running.
Perfect. I'm going to pull you back when you use terms that.
Oh, totally. Yeah, no,
that
that's awesome. Thank you. All right. So as I got started in my research world, I started developing this main question that drove a lot of my research. And I know this is an odd question, but it's, why do we run the way we run? And what's really interesting is, like, Ted, if I see you running, a tenth of a mile away, or, coming down the finish chute, I know it's you running, but I don't see any facial features.
Yeah.
And likewise, you can pick people out that simply by looking at the way that they run, and it has nothing to do with facial features.
Yeah.
And so
My wife can pick me out from a mile away.
totally, yeah.
And she can pick me out swimming too.
Yes, yeah.
Right, which is pretty amazing because all you're seeing is such a small piece. But like, if we're for example, like an Oceanside where you can kind of get above and see.
Yeah.
She's like, I can follow you the entire race.
That's
like,
right.
That's amazing. All you could see is like my arms and a little bit of my head.
No, that's so cool. And so there's something inherent about why you move the way you move.
Yep.
And I've always found this interesting in terms of just a theoretical question. So why do we run the way we run? I'm not the first one to think of this. Nicola Bernstein back in the 60s, 50s, he did this type of work, not necessarily running, but just why do we move the way we move? And that you can pick someone's movements out. You can identify them just by their movements. Now, what I've done is I've looked at this question from a physiological perspective, where I measure things like heart rate or rate of oxygen consumption. I'll talk about those a little bit. I do a lot in biomechanics, where I look at forces, I look at impact, I look at injury, and then even from a motor control or motor coordination perspective, where we're trying to learn, or maybe we're using some visual information that ultimately may drive the way we run. And then there's other things too, and there's other factors that will influence why we run the way we run. So this is just a little cartoon of my approach to research, and that schematic is actually from my dissertation, where I was mapping out results, and that's I call myself a biomechanist because a lot of times when I get a question like, why do we run the way we run, I typically think of an equation or an algorithm first and then try to work off of that. But the other part here is the physiology. We're taking, when we're running, we're taking chemical energy in our body, fats, carbohydrates, and we're transforming that to mechanical energy, the movement. All right, and we do that aerobically and anaerobically. And so this is a key to understanding physiology of movement, how fast we're able to transform energy from one form to another, and then how long we can do it as well. All right, so this is sort of a combining of my two worlds. And so in trying to answer the question, why we run the way we run, that's actually a really hard question to answer. So what I've done over the years is I've taken people, and actually some that may be watching this video, we put them in the water and we see how they change the way they run when they're in the water, either in shallow water or deep water, or we have them run on different surfaces, something really soft or maybe something really stiff. We put them in special treadmills that have body weight support, and we see how they run, or we fatigue them, or put them in different shoes. And really what we're doing is looking at how they're changing the way they run, and that sort of gives us some clues in terms of why they are running a particular way for any situation. And I don't have an answer for the question yet, by the way, so still working on this. All right, so how do we measure running style? All right, so like I said, we started off saying you can pick someone out just by their running style. Well, we look at forces, so a push or a pull that tends to move something, pushing on the ground, or this is muscle force. We look at muscle activity. That's how active a muscle is. And so we put sensors on the muscles, much like an EKG, but instead of looking at electrical activity of the heart, we look at electrical activity of the muscle. And we do a lot of kinematics, joint kinematics to how much the knee flexes or extends or how fast it extends. But then we also put accelerometers on different parts of the body. I've done a lot of that work, and that's been a neat area and has led to some either some other work that we're doing right now with bike vibration. So it's pretty similar work. Now, the basic, and all these different studies that I've done, the basic kinematic descriptors, or what the movement looks like descriptors, is stride length and stride frequency. So these are two key parameters, and they're pretty easy to measure, but there's also some details in measuring these that we need to know. And what's interesting is if we start having people change stride length or change stride frequency, then we see some interesting changes in physiology and mechanics as well. All right, so now let me define stride length and stride frequency. And unfortunately, in the literature, even this gets confusing. And even in our everyday conversation, we use stride and sometimes step to mean the same thing or something different. So here's just running on a treadmill. Hopefully this works. All right, a stride is all the movements between 1 foot contact, or excuse me, any discrete event during a stride. When a discrete event is any single frame looking on this in this video. So it happens in a very short period of time. So a discrete event that we typically use is contact with the ground, because that's foot's not in contact with the ground, then all of a sudden it's in contact with the ground. So that's an easy discrete event to pick out. So stride is all the movements between the same side discrete event to the very next same side, same discrete event. So ground contact to ground contact, from the right foot. That's a stride. All right. I could use left foot to left foot. I could do toe off to toe off, whatever it is, but it's the same side, all the movements, most of the time. Now, what some people do is they use step and stride to mean the same thing. A step is right to left or left to right. And a stride is right, right, or left, left. It gets a little confusing, but it's a lot like in swimming where sometimes we say, a length versus a lap. A lot of times all you need to do is just, hey, which way are you talking about? Do I need to do 10 lengths, or do I need to do 10, laps, or do I go down and back 20 times? Or, once you get on the same page with the lingo, you're okay. But a lot of times I have to warn the students I work with when they're reading the literature, they have to be really careful about defining or knowing how the authors have defined stride or step. Now, Garmin uses stride, but they actually mean step. So it gets a little confusing. I don't get too bent out of shape out of it. You just need to know it. But when I'm using stride, I'm using the definition of same side, all the movements between right foot strike to the next same right foot strike. All right, okay, now someone asked about Usain Bolt, so I thought I'd put a video on here. Usain Bolt's got the same, stride. So here's stride length from that foot contact to the same foot contact and that distance that he's covering. Sorry, this video is a little choppy at this point. So as he's running, his foot's going to strike the ground. And then if we want to measure stride length, it's the distance covered from the same foot strike to the very next same foot strike. And I'm going to run out of it. Okay. But you get the point that you measure the distance that the person's traveling from left foot strike to left foot strike.
John, I think that Garmin also does step length when they say stride length as well.
That's right. That's right. Garmin uses.
Don't get confused. Basically, you have to double it.
Oh, they do have step. I didn't see that they. Okay, I usually look at
on the newer running metrics they have. I think they have that.
Okay.
I think mine is like 1.12 meters or something.
Very good.
Yeah, and that's step length.
Yeah, so you would look at like the right step would depending on how they're defining it, from the right foot to the left foot contact.
Right.
So something like that. So, oh, sorry, my video's, he's going backwards right now. All right.
It's the same stride length backwards as forwards.
That's right. And we've actually done a lot of backward locomotion too, in order to try to understand what's going on forward wise. And backwards is not running forwards in reverse. So we've learned. Okay, so here's just some definitions. It's just good to have. So here's right foot, right foot contact, step, step. Stride is the whole thing. And then we can measure how fast stride is happening. That would be stride frequency. Or we can measure how long or how much distance we cover between right foot to right foot, and that's stride length. Now, if we know those two parameters, we know how fast the person's running. So running velocity is the product of stride length and stride frequency. And this is a basis for a lot of our experiments, is that we may control velocity and then manipulate stride length, which means that we're also manipulating stride frequency. Or if you're running outside and you decide I'm going to run with a different stride frequency, well, these two things, you're not necessarily going to run faster because you may change this in a way that you can run slower. So there's an interplay between these three parameters, but this is the math. And this is one of the things that we need to talk about when we start looking at, we want to run faster. What combination of stride length and stride frequency do we want to select? All right.
So John, if we change one of those, which I know you're going to talk about, can you still tell it's me running? Like, let's say I say, oh, I'm going to run with a lot higher frequency, because I'm going to be racing. Could you, do you know what I mean? Is it still like that obvious, or?
You know what, that's a good question. I'd like to think that the answer is still yes, but I haven't done that, but that would be,
I think it's still yes. I think you can make these discrete changes, and still there's something inherent in how everybody runs, that being unique, that even by changing these things, it's still.
Yeah, but I'll also say at the end of an Ironman, it is harder to pick people out.
Yeah, because everyone's
of their
doing
movement.
Ironman shuffle.
That's right. Unless you've seen that person and how they move near the end of an Ironman. So it may be so dramatically different that you might not be able to pick them.
Or the end of like an ultra.
Yeah. And that's why I always say, trying to, watch an Ironman and you're trying to pick out your athlete, sometimes it's exhausting because you have to really pay attention, and it can get a little tiring just trying to see each person. Okay, so let's talk about how these change at different velocities. So this is just a model, pretty classic work. So this is stride length or stride frequency units here, and then this is running velocity down here. So as we run faster, stride length tends to increase at first, but eventually starts to plateau when we're running over ground, right? Now, again, the product of these two is going to tell us the running velocity. As we run faster, stride frequency doesn't change a lot at the slower speeds, but as we start running faster, it starts to change a lot more. And so to run as fast as Usain Bolt runs, you need to really be up in this region and use a really high cadence, a real high stride frequency. Now, he also has a long stride length, which makes him an incredible sprinter. All right, so the limits to stride length are morphology, or how we're built, so how long our limbs are, how much flexibility we have, how much range of motion we may have in our hips or our knees, and it's also a limit of projectile motion. So there's a period where you're running where you are just a projectile, you're not touching the ground anymore. And so you can only cover so much distance based upon how you're launching yourself into the air to be able to go into the next foot strike. Stride frequency is limited based upon the ability to generate force to propel the body forward in terms of pushing on the ground. But then also, and this is actually really interesting, stride frequency is going to be limited in terms of how fast you can bring that leg back forward. And so those hip flexors become really important when you're trying to run faster. Is you have to be able to swing that leg back even at a faster rate than than the velocity that you're running at.
So John, I think that, stride frequency is also, it's a neuromuscular issue, right? So it's actually more, there's more of a neuromuscular coordination built in, and movement patterns and stuff like that built into that as well.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And I should, you can learn.
Yep. Yes, that's a great point. And first I should back up and say, I use stride frequency and stride rate, and everybody does, interchangeably.
Yeah.
They mean the same thing. And sometimes I just get lazy. I always get on my students about using consistent terminology, but I certainly get lazy and use stride rate and stride frequency at different times. So no, you're spot on. And I think that's actually one of the training tips that our coaches use, is they do a faster than race pace training session. And then you can even, you can do that with body weight support type treadmills, or doing something like running downhill, or assisted run where they use the elastic cords to try to learn that pattern of movement to be able to run faster. It is a learned aspect, yeah.
And it's something that I think that long distance athletes like yourself and myself probably don't like to do, because the research actually shows us that's increased injury risk.
Yeah.
Because all of those things to generate increased stride frequency generates more force.
That's right.
And more force, unfortunately, it's got to be dissipated somewhere. And oftentimes it's the musculotendinous units or muscle and tendons that take up that force and increases injury risk. So that's like there's a balance there to doing that. And I think that's important to understand.
No, you're spot on. And that's actually why I've done a lot of research on running in the water, as well as running with body weight support, running with on a special treadmill that lifts you up while you run. Those are two situations to reduce that force.
If you're running in the water though, and this, I don't know the answer, you've done more research on this than I do. Could you ever get the same speed?
No, in fact, that's one of the, I'll probably mention that later on. That's one of the really interesting things, is that when we put someone in the water and they start running, the cadence that they select to run, when you just say, hey, run in the water, will be so much slower than running on land. All right. Which makes sense because of the water.
You can't really work on that neuromuscular component of stride frequency in the water.
No, you can't. But the training studies that I have seen be successful, and some of the work that we've done, is that we know running in the water gets closer to looking at like running on land when you use high cadence in the water, high stride frequency. So again, I'm using cadence, stride rate, and stride frequency, all to mean the same thing. So in the water, if you use a faster, to get the benefit of running in the water, you have to use some high stride rate. And then your muscle patterns start to look more complex, like running on land. Yeah. So I always tell people, to try to get a benefit of running in the water, you have to do intervals. And because you got to do that high cadence, and then you've got to slow down, rest, recover, and then do it again. Just doing a long sustained running in the water, your running pattern just does not look enough like running on land. And the training studies have not been as successful when people do that.
So maybe you could run downhill in the water?
Say that again?
You run downhill in the water? I'm just teasing you now.
Most of the work that I do is deep water running, so they're not touching the bottom at all.
I know.
Yeah.
Because you can only go so far before you're under the water.
I know. Well, and a lot of people will find out about my research, and then they'll say, oh, so you do underwater running. I said, no, I don't. I mean, I'll usually leave that alone, but yeah, it's deep water running. Your head's still out of the water and running. Okay, so here's just some data that we did a while ago with one of my students, Josh Bailey's up in Idaho now teaching. And this is one of those interesting things. This is just supporting the graph I just showed. So here's stride frequency and stride length, and then running velocity. So we just took a whole bunch of people, we put the Garmin watch on them, and we had them run a whole bunch of different velocities outdoors. and then on the treadmill. And here's the stride frequency model, that you're increasing stride frequency a lot more, especially as you start running faster. So 4 meters per second, that's about 8 miles per hour, 9 miles per hour. So 7-minute mile type of pace. So this is not 100-meter Usain Bolt. 100 meters Usain Bolt is going to be all the way up here. All right. The red line, interestingly, oh, well, here's the stride length, which follows this model right here. So nice gradual curve, nice gradual curve, nice gradual curve, nice gradual curve. But then we put people on the treadmill and we did the same thing and had them run the same range of velocities for the most part. And interestingly enough, they never, the model looked quite different when you run on the treadmill. And that to achieve faster velocity on the treadmill, you just kept increasing stride length. Right?
Yep. Well, because
So
the
now
ground's
you're like,
moving under you, right?
what's that?
Because the ground is moving under you instead of
That's
you,
right.
you moving over the ground. It's a different, it's a different thing.
This is one of the key messages with a lot of the work I've done is I've learned that humans are inherently lazy. Well, I knew that before.
Well, that's what this model shows.
That's right. And what I often mean by that is we figure out the easiest way to do something. And so you're right. This is exactly what this model shows, because when you're running on the treadmill and we ask you to run faster, what people figured out is, oh, well, all I need to do is jump up higher and then let the treadmill move underneath me. And that's going to technically,
that's the trick for all of you that are going to do like the Las Vegas indoor the indoor triathlons.
Yeah.
Treadmill.
Yeah.
It's not just literally jump in the air a little higher.
That's right.
Every step, especially because it's only a 5K. I shouldn't be telling all my secrets, but I read obviously Josh's in your paper here, and that's exactly what I do.
Yeah.
So can I tell a quick little anecdote?
Yeah.
So I just love this one. So, about humans being lazy, I read this somewhere, but it was, if humans could fly, they wouldn't, because it's too much work. Right? Because it would be very efficient. Oh, sorry. Did you not hear that?
No. Yeah. My phone's ringing. Okay. Sorry about that.
I said, if humans could fly, they wouldn't, because it's too much work.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Because we know the most efficient way to get somewhere probably is to why would you walk when you could run?
Yeah.
Harder. Yeah. So I'll just walk. It'll take a little longer. I'll get there, but it's more efficient to run than it is to walk, but we choose not to because it's hard. So we definitely would not fly. There'd be a few of us, probably the members of the triathlon club. We would, flying would be one of the sports.
Yeah.
But people are inherently lazy.
So I haven't done any flying research, but I did collaborate with a colleague in biology, and we once did a seminar on by air, by land, by sea, where we looked at locomotion from flying and running and swimming. And so I can't tell you too much about it, but I do have a student who, Jason Vance, he's back in the East now, and he's teaching that. And he did his dissertation on flying bees.
Yeah.
And he took a lot of his human research that we worked on his master's together. He took his, and he actually did some, I don't have that data in this one, but he used spring boots for his thesis and looked at energetic cost of running in spring boots. And he applied that to bumblebees. I think it was bumblebees. Hopefully Jason's not watching this and I'm getting that wrong, but so yes, you're right. This is the whole idea of humans is we optimize, and I'm going to talk about that in just a bit. And I wanted to put this up here, one, because it's just sort of
John, I'll add, we optimize for short-term gain.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because what you're showing here is not developing great running. If we're running on a treadmill so we can become a better runner outside, for example.
Yeah.
Right. So we're not optimizing ourselves by running on a treadmill like this.
Right.
Right. So we're doing this so we can get a good split on the treadmill, but it's not inherently good for us maybe long-term. Would you agree?
That's spot on. And so in general, running on a treadmill is a good model to study running over ground. But there are a lot of unique features of running on the treadmill that that distinguish it from running over ground. And so if you want to be a fast treadmill runner, run on the treadmill. If you've got a competition on a treadmill for whatever reason. But most of us are training over ground, so we need to do our running over ground because there are differences. Now, if you need to run on a treadmill, that's fine, but I would not train for a marathon solely by running on
But John, let's say you ran on a treadmill, but you set a cadence for yourself with like a metronome,
Yep.
and you increased your cadence properly.
That's right.
Then it would be more efficient or more effective, don't you think?
I think so. I think and that's what this speaks to is you need to know that there's some subtle differences between running on a treadmill and running over ground. In general, it's fine. Running on a treadmill is a nice way to supplement some running, maybe replace some running over ground, especially when it gets really hot out. If you want to run inside, that might be a good thing, but just know that it's different.
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep going. Now, you started talking about optimization, or I mentioned it. This is the whole key with stride frequency.
This is the whole enchilada right here.
Yeah, this is now, I gotta explain this graph a little bit. So this graph we generate by having someone come into the lab. We have them hooked up to a mask where we measure how much air is being drawn into the lungs and how much air is being exhaled out of the lungs. And then we have that air, we collect it, and a computer analyzes the air, and then it determines how much of that oxygen was used for muscle contraction and how much carbon dioxide was exhaled. All right. So this is getting to this term VO2, volume of oxygen used. Now, I technically should have a dot over V because right now this should be a rate of oxygen consumption, how fast we're using oxygen. Why do we need to know that? Well, when we go back to that model that I presented in that early slide, where we take chemical energy and we transform it to mechanical energy, one way we do that is through the aerobic energy pathway. And that takes that chemical energy, and through the use of oxygen, we ultimately generate a force. And that's what's going to allow us to move. And so from a physiological perspective and from a research perspective, we want to know VO2 to know how much aerobic conversion of chemical energy there is, how fast we're using our fats and our carbohydrates, in essence, to generate muscle force and then force pushing on the ground. All right, now it's a rate of oxygen consumption. Another way to think of this VO2 number is it's how fast we're using calories. All right, so if you're more in the nutrition world, we're using maybe 100 calories per hour or 200 calories or whatever it is, but it's a rate of energy expenditure. Now, well, I caught myself. That's not actually correct because I don't have that slide in here, but there's another way to look at this data in terms of total calories used. But this is a rate of how fast we're converting chemical energy to mechanical energy. Now, in the cycling world, instead of using VO2, I put power on that axis. And power is the same concept. Power is how fast we're transforming energy from one form to another. So I always use the light bulb as an example. We know a 60-watt light bulb is brighter than a 30-watt light bulb. That wattage just tells us how fast we're transforming electrical energy to light energy. So in the cycling world,
but I think that maybe it's important if you could let people know that in cycling, we're trying to create as much power as possible.
Mm-hmm.
In running, we're trying to be as efficient as possible. So use right, like use the least amount of power to go the fastest.
Yes. Well, ideally, we want, and when we're running or cycling or swimming, we want to use the least amount of oxygen to go as fast as possible.
Right.
Right. Because the more this VO2 goes up, the faster our breathing rate, the faster our heart rate, the harder the exercise feels, and we won't be able to go as long. So if we can eventually reduce this VO2 number, that means we're becoming more economical. And that's one of the things with learning a good running style, is to have as little rate of oxygen consumption as possible. An efficient car. I mean, we always use the car as you know, a nice analogy here. It's, you know, you have an efficiency of a car.
So I'll give you another anecdote.
Mhm.
As we talked about before, I'm not the greatest swimmer in the world. And you know, I don't want to improve my swimming because I want to burn more calories, right?
Yep.
If I swim 2,500 yards and I'm an efficient swimmer,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's gonna take me it's gonna take me, well, it'll take me less calories to do 2,500 yards.
Yep.
If I'm a inefficient swimmer, same thing. And it's the same with running, right? If we're an inefficient runner, to go to run for an hour versus an efficient runner running for an hour, it's going to be more calories if I'm inefficient.
That's right.
And probably slower.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
No, you're spot on.
Yep.
And so that's exactly what this graph is all about. All right. So now I bring you in the lab. I hook you up to this machine. I can measure VO2, and then I just have you run at a set speed, whatever the speed is. It doesn't matter. You know, maybe you're running, you know, 6.5 minute miles. All right. You're just going to pick a combination of stride frequency and stride length just naturally. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're just going to pick it. And then I measure that VO2. That's what this number is going to be. So you're going to run maybe 3 minutes. Then I'm going to say, okay, Ted, I want you to take a faster stride frequency, but still run the same speed. So you're still running 6.5 minute mile. All right. So you're going to run a faster stride frequency, so a shorter stride length. Well, what happens is your VO2 will typically go up. So this is exactly what you're talking about. You're becoming less efficient of a runner. You're creating movements that are costing more. You need to convert more chemical energy to mechanical energy.
And I think you need to repeat what you said too, because I think it's a little confusing for people. I'm going the same speed.
The same speed. That's right.
So I'm not getting to the finish line any faster.
That's
I
right.
increased stride frequency. I just made it more difficult on myself
Exactly.
to do
That's
this to basically get to the finish line at the exact same time. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's perfect. Now let's do it again. And I say, okay, now take a faster stride frequency. And so an even shorter stride length, still running 6.5 minute miles. Your VO2 is going to go up. You're going to become a less efficient runner, less economical. You're going to use more calories to run at that speed. It's going to be harder. Your RPE is going to go up. Your rating of perceived exertion will go up. All right, so then I bring it back down, and now I say, okay, let's take let's go shorter stride length, or excuse me, a longer stride length, or a slower stride rate.
I think, John, we should stop really quick and tell people that this always has to play a role with each other. And I don't think we really covered that, is as stride frequency goes up, stride length goes down.
When we're controlling velocity.
When we're controlling velocity.
Exactly.
I think that's really important that we let people know that. So because you're using them really, really quickly.
Yep.
Just so people understand that this is an absolute relationship that has to change if you keep speed the same.
And this graph is everything in terms of recommending stride rate, stride frequency. Those recommendations are based on this data.
Yeah.
Data just like this. So now I'm going to tell you to take a slower stride frequency, same 6.5 minute mile pace, longer stride, VO2 is going to go up. I'm going to tell you to take a slower stride frequency, VO2 is going to go up. Same 6.5 minute mile. Just like you said, you're still running your 5K in the same pace. Your still finish time is still the same for all of these, but now you've made it harder when you've taken a really slow stride frequency or real fast stride frequency. So what you want to do is be at this minimum. And so hopefully your self-selected or your preferred stride frequency and preferred stride length is right here. Now, sometimes maybe the rate that you choose is actually not at that minimum. And now that's where, as a coach, we want to start trying to figure out how to shift somebody in one direction or the other. And usually, if you're the rate that you choose and the length that you choose for this velocity, is not at this minimum. It's usually a little bit to the left, and you usually have to increase your stride frequency.
Research says between 3 and 8%, right? So
yeah. So yeah, these numbers, when we do this experiment, this would typically be 5% slower, 10% slower. Sometimes we go out to 15% slower, and then 5% faster, 10%. Sometimes
I was talking about the percentage of cadence that you, or of frequency that you yourself selected is usually 3% to 8% lower than the most efficient.
Yeah,
like if you're just to pull people off of the street and they didn't know anything about it,
you're going to be right around that. That's right. You're going to be really, most of the time, you're going to be really close to this. Now, if you're less than 5%, or if you're within a 5% range, this change in VO2 is not that big of a deal. It's not. I mean, it's like, in terms of numbers, this may be 30 mLs per kg per minute, and then this may be 31 mLs per, a really small amount. All right.
So John, let me ask you this then. So if it was one liter per minute of oxygen, what does that actually mean as far as like calories? Maybe like in a marathon, like you're out there for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Would that 1 liter per minute in over 300 or 240 minutes make a difference?
If you're trying to go under 2 hours for the marathon,
then yes,
all this matters. Okay.
Well, let's say you went 3:01 in a marathon and your goal is to go under 3, and you've been training, then that could make a difference, right? It
can. But the further we get out in terms of the time, and I think I've got a picture on my next slide on this, we'll actually find that you have some wiggle room to play with stride frequency. And I think that's an important point, is that you can increase or decrease your stride frequency and not negatively influence your VO2.
Yep.
All right. And so that, I think, for us mere mortals is a good message, because you can play around and you can figure out what that stride rate should be, because maybe, and you talked about injury, maybe you're picking a stride rate more to prevent an injury or to rehab from an injury. There may be other reasons that you're picking a stride rate. If I'm, Eliud Kipchoge trying to get under 2 hours, I'm going to try to figure out what this stride rate is, and I'm trying to nail it.
No, I couldn't agree more, because oftentimes when we look at injury, one of the biggest predictor of injury is overstriding.
Yeah, that's right.
It's basically having too long of a stride length.
That's right.
So then my question would be, John, can we move like this that you have over time with training? Can I?
Okay. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I had forgotten to say that. It's really hard to get someone to run with a different stride rate. So when we do this type of work, when I did some of these projects early on, I would set a metronome and I'd set it to 5%. And I'd just say, okay, this is good, just match this. And I'd usually have to record data from anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. And I'd let the person run, and then I'd come back and I'd look at them. I'm like, wait, you're all the way back here again. So they would just naturally gravitate back towards their preferred rate. And then if I put them up here, man, it was so hard to keep them 10%, 15% faster stride rate. And I really had to sit there, and eventually I just bang on the treadmill and say, keep this beat. You really have to pay attention to it, because they want to keep remember, we're picking this rate for some reason. Yeah. And my, the work that I and others have done is, it's not a physiological reason. And so there's other things going on here, because this is not really a pure U-shaped. There's more of a flat region in here, and the exact rate that you're picking is different.
I've found that with motivated, chronically injured people, it's easier.
Yep.
Because what I prescribe with people is, okay, let's change you 3%.
Yeah.
And let's do it for a week or 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's go another 3%. And I'm not saying, so I'm making like a 6% change.
Yep.
In a month.
Right.
And for example, if somebody's injured and they're coming back from an injury and they can only run a mile or 2.
Yep.
and you set a metronome for them. And for those of you that don't know, if you're running with a running watch, they almost all have metronomes.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to use it, I suggest you do. If you
Yep.
really want to get down with this stuff, and then you can make change.
Yep.
And I found that if you go a month, and you can make, we call it in the neurophysiology world, like plastic change, right? That change that actually sticks.
Yep.
And I've taken people with stride rates of 160 and brought them to 170, and it's stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it became efficient for them.
Right.
Because in the beginning, that's the other issue when we make these changes, and you I think made mention to it already, is the VO2 is going to, or sorry, the VO2 is going to increase.
Yeah.
But over time, they can become more efficient at that new stride frequency.
There's a training that goes on. That's right.
Yeah.
Now, so you're doing the right thing, because subtle changes in stride frequency, you can hit those.
Yep.
Big changes, and when I say big changes, 5% is a big number.
Yep.
And so trying to take on a new stride frequency of 5% faster, it's not easy. And so, yeah, you need to have some type of device that's either auditory or vibration to help keep you on that beat. Now, here's what's really interesting. I mentioned this before. If I put someone in the water, they're going to pick a stride frequency about half of this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If I put someone running on grass, they're going to automatically choose a different preferred stride rate for running the same speed. If I put them in sand, or if I put them in different shoes or different surfaces, they will automatically change this preferred stride rate, which I think is a neat coaching point, because have people run in different surfaces.
Yeah.
And you will naturally pick different rates.
Yeah. I notice it a lot when I do trail running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes I'm going relatively the same speed, but my frequency is completely different.
That's right. Because when you're trail running, you're be up in this region, but you're up in this region for a different reason, because your visual information, you're trying to watch 1 or 2 steps in front of you, so you don't trip. And so you're sacrificing, efficiency. You're having greater VO2 for safety. Yep. And that's why this question, why do we run the way we run, ends up being really a hard question to answer, because you need a little bit of context to answer the question. Why do I run the way I run on trails, or on a track, or in grass, or in the water? It ends up being sort of a fun, never-ending scenario that we got to deal with. All right, we're almost out of time.
I know, we're having such a good time though.
I know. Okay, so I put this slide up here. This is just some work from my dissertation back in the 90s, where I did this experiment. Here's stride. I was looking at stride length changes at the time, but this is, I could put stride frequency here. It would just be, because the product of stride length and stride frequency is velocity. So this is running one velocity. Here's that U-shaped curve, okay? And then I had people do a fatigue protocol, and then have them run again. And they ended up picking up the same stride length, in this case, which would be the same stride frequency, when they were system fatigued. And so I was looking at what happens when you get tired. It did shift a little bit faster, but then I also did a protocol. I had them also just fatigue the quadriceps only, because I wanted to see what would happen if you just make your quadriceps, if you trash them. And when you just fatigue your quadriceps, you end up picking the same preferred stride rate. So this is just sort of a fun fatigue. You do change the way you run. The tough part of this experiment is I'm forcing them to run the same speed. Typically, when we get tired, we'll slow down. And so this experimental model doesn't really hold up very well when we start going out in the real world and doing fatigue studies. Okay, this is just the same information. But here, sort of what we're talking about before, I've got this picture right here. It's not actually a picture of this runner here. It's a picture of me back here. This is Boulder Ironman. And, so it's just important to remember that is the relationship between stride rate, stride frequency, stride length, and velocity, is it the same at the beginning, middle, and ending portions of an Ironman or a marathon? And, you know, if you're doubled over in pain, then obviously not, but I thought that'd just be fun. I think I'll stop here. But
Yeah,
this,
let's talk
yeah,
more about the practical application, then let's get into this other stuff at another time.
yeah, no, that'd be good, because the other way I've looked at why we run the way we run is not from a physiological perspective, but from a mechanical perspective. And so I've done a lot of work at looking at impact forces and the influence of stride changes in stride frequency with impact. And what from the physiological world, I've learned that you have some wiggle room. You probably have a wiggle room of plus and minus 3 to 5% changes in stride frequency that you can play around with, where you are not going to negatively influence VO2. And then, so now why do you pick a particular rate, or should you have a different rate to minimize impact or what have you? All right, so I'll save these for another time. Stride frequency, generally runners pick the stride frequency that's optimal or close to optimal. Plus or minus 5%, 10% is a little bit high, will not negatively influence VO2. There's some wiggle room. Do some drills, experience other stride frequencies than what you normally run at. And that is the best way to try to figure out, or a way to try to figure out the right rate for you.
Can I just throw in one thing really quickly here, John?
Yeah.
Because it's really exactly what you're getting at. So one of the little things you can do, because there's you know, you obviously, the average person doesn't have access to this equipment, right? To figure this stuff out. So one of the things that you do, and you can look in the literature this as well, the best surrogate for this is heart rate.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can get on a track and you have basically the same kind of day, same kind of heat, same kind of everything, you can mess around with this stuff, and you can look at your heart rate at different cadences or stride lengths, and where your heart rate is the lowest at a given, if you can keep the speed the same,
yep,
that will be very close to finding your most efficient running cadence. Correct?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I talked a lot about VO2. You need special equipment to measure VO2. Heart rate is a nice predictor of VO2. It's a proxy for VO2. And so why do we measure heart rate when we're exercising? Is because that's really giving us an indication of VO2 for submax, you know, controlled, steady state exercise.
And remember, all of this stuff is submaximal, right? This is,
yeah, that's right.
This is not race pace.
Yep.
Well, although you can do the same thing at race pace.
Yep.
Try and find your most
That's
efficient
right.
cadence at race pace as well.
That's right. Yep.
And, you know, and that's something that we actually didn't even touch on, John.
No.
Was obviously you're not your most efficient when you're running a 5K versus going out for a training run,
mm-hmm,
right? But you are the most efficient for that speed. So that's the other thing to think about. You're still, like, we can mess around with cadence, but we're always messing around with speed.
Yeah.
Right. So run a 5K or race a 5K, race a 10K, race a half marathon, race a marathon. We're changing the speed now. Yeah. And then ultimately we're going to be changing stride length, stride frequency, and still trying to, our body will almost always find the optimal cadence and frequency and length.
That's right. That's right. So training for a faster race, you're simply trying to find the right cadence to be able to cover that distance as fast as possible, or you're training to be able to go longer.
Yeah.
And both of those are influenced by the rate that you're choosing, and ultimately how you're training the system to convert that chemical energy to mechanical energy.
Yeah. So John, what's your you know, let's say we're going to race Pumpkin Man. What's your 5K cadence? Do you know?
Yeah, actually, I don't have my let me stop sharing this.
I'm just more interested because, you know, I don't know other people's very well. I know mine. I don't know other people's.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because it is highly individual.
Right.
You know,
that's what I wanted to share was you know, that everyone's getting quite different.
Yeah, and so like, someone asked about, Matt asked about Usain Bolt's cadence. I looked it up, and it's crazy. It's like, depending on the speed he's running at, can be anywhere from 120 to 140, 150 strides per minute, where typically we're doing around 80. Like if we most of us run probably right around 80 strides per minute.
I looked at that one from Gwen Jorgensen, and I posted
Yep.
the video. She did 180 and was
Yep.
running a 33-minute 10K.
Yep.
So
Yep.
so 90 per step.
That's right. Or 90, I would say, in my world, I'd say she was running at a cadence of 90 strides per minute.
Strides per minute, yeah. So,
And I saw 186 for her too. Yeah.
yeah.
So
And
yeah.
all I just counted. I looked at the time on the clock and I counted her steps for a minute. That's all I did.
That's perfect. Well, and so, but the key is, my cadence is my cadence.
Yep.
Yours is yours. And my cadence is going to be a function of my body size and my run experience, as well as my level of fatigue or non-fatigue. And Gwen's is Gwen's, and Usain is Usain. And that's one of the things that I think in the running world, we sort of fell into a trap where someone did some work early on and said, hey, this is really interesting. All the elite runners in the Olympics were running at about 180 steps per minute, 90 strides per minute. Oh, maybe that's what we all need to do. And there's no absolute number that we should be shooting for. It's really, you really need to figure out your own.
But are there some general takeaways as far as, and this is what I've read, there are, like, so taller people in general have shorter stride frequencies, or sorry, smaller stride frequencies. Shorter people tend to have higher stride frequencies. More experienced runners tend to have higher frequencies than less experienced. So, I mean, there are some general things, don't you? Is that what you understand as well?
In general.
Yeah.
So
if you take 1,000 people.
That's right. And we know if someone's 6'5", they're going to have a longer stride than someone who is, 4'9".
Yeah.
That just because. But when we start looking at groups that are sort of closer together, interestingly enough, leg length and height doesn't necessarily tell us what their stride rate will be. So it's not necessarily just morphology. It's a factor, but it's not necessarily the key one.
And then, John, let me ask you one more question about maybe like outliers.
Yeah.
So let's say you've got somebody that they're really struggling with their running, and they come into the lab and you put them on the treadmill and their stride frequency is something like 140, like really low, 70, right? Is that to a point where it's really, even for them, if it's preferred, is it still like too low? Can that be the case? Like they just never really, maybe they never learned how to run properly or something. I don't know. Like I'm just.
So that gets to the term that you mentioned before, overstriding.
Yeah.
And the other part of the work that I had on that presentation is more into the mechanics. And what's interesting is as we start taking a longer stride, the impact with the ground goes up. And so now we've got to, somehow that fits this equation with, our brain trying to pick a particular stride rate or stride length in terms of how hard the foot's hitting the ground. So, but here's the part that we already struggled with when we looked at this is, okay, well, you can have a longer stride with a greater impact, but to cover a 5K, you're going to have a fewer number of strides.
Yep.
So now, are you accumulating less load? And we never got, there's no answer for that, but it was just an interesting way to think about it.
That's if it's, but I think it's nonlinear. I mean, that's getting into a whole other topic. But those are great. Those are great questions, right?
Well, and Colleen, I'm just looking at Facebook. She actually asks, is there something about muscle fiber composition? And yes, we've actually looked at muscle activity a little bit more. We haven't done muscle fiber work.
But there is in the genetic research on this.
Mm-hmm.
You actually can look, you can pull out, and I know you've done your 23andMe and you've looked at your muscle fiber genetic predispositions.
Yep.
There is some work done on that particular thing and stride frequency. If somebody's more a strength athlete, that potentially would have more stride, the ability to have more stride frequency. Yeah. I actually think it's not that much. I actually think it's more of the neurologic patterning. So you look at like cerebellum and the midbrain, and
Yep.
where all things are happening basically in the brain. I think that's probably more important than the actual fiber type.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because and the fiber type will come into play a lot with swinging the leg forward, because you have to swing that leg forward twice as fast as the speed you're running.
So since Colleen is on there, and I've worked with Colleen, one of the things that we talk about fiber type, and if you look at the research on this, and John, I don't know if you've looked at this, but when we look at the amount of plantar flexion when we run, so the amount that you use your calf basically, the calf is a muscle that is more slow or more fast twitch fiber than slow twitch. So if we can limit the amount of plantar flexion at the end of the push off, we actually can become a little bit more efficient because we're not utilizing fast twitch fibers earlier. And so there is something said for that. Utilizing muscle groups that are more inherently fast twitch versus slow twitch. And training yourself with mechanics that ultimately utilize that type of muscle fiber. I think there is something to be said for that.
That's good. So that's why I love it. You have much more of a coaching perspective than this. Why I'm not a running coach. So
I'm not a running coach at all. I'm someone that solves people's injuries.
Oh, that's
right? Like that's my thing is if somebody, for example, has like chronic calf issues and they're a runner, we're going to look at that, like how much plantar flexion are they having before push off, and understanding that muscle fiber type is not built for running 20K. The gastroc in particular it's a sprinting, it's a power muscle. And so sometimes, once again, we have to make changes to how people run, not because of efficiency necessarily. Well, that would be efficiency as well, but so they don't get injured.
So where you're going, this is really interesting, and we've done some work in this area, is that, if you run your same mileage, which I'm guilty of doing, run 4 miles every day, same route every day, you're going to keep
boring
running
on Strava, by the way. You're completely boring.
I know, I am. But it's predictable. That's all it is. But you end up running the same way over and over and over and over and over again. But to do some of these things that you're talking about, you need to experience other ways of running. And we think about, great basketball players or great skilled sports players, they do a layup. They can do a layup 500 different ways. They have lots of do it, do a little different angle, maybe with the left arm, with the right arm, whatever. But the best basketball, they're going to have lots of different ways to be able to do a layup. Runners, we need to have lots of different ways to run. Now, how do you learn those? Well, just like you learn different layup styles, you play a lot of basketball, you do some different drills, and in running, doing some drills, running sideways, running backwards, doing trail running, running on grass, running in bare feet at times, being in bare feet. These are all good sort of ways to mix up the system so that the system can start trying to figure out the best way to run.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And having different cues for yourself. I know we have a colleague that does a lot of work on like focus and internal focus and external focus, and using different focuses and different cues. This is not a plug for Garmin today, by the way. We're all a little upset with Garmin from last weekend, but using some of the metrics that they have to play games, right? So for a long time, I was looking at the right-left balance. So that's something that if you have their chest strap with their watch, you can actually look at, right-left balance. And I was really trying so hard to get 50-50.
Oh, interesting.
And the more I tried, the harder it became. And I was messing with my cadence. I was doing all these different things, but it was good. Like, cause I was doing different things. Right. And then you can look at ground contact time. Okay, I want to decrease that, or vertical oscillation. I want to decrease that. I want to increase that. I want to play around with these things. And I think that helps make you potentially more robust. And that's what we ultimately are talking about, John, because like you said, you do the same thing day in, day out, right? You don't get injured very much. Because you've created basically this robustness of that. But realistically, if you make big changes to it now, you'll get injured.
Yeah. And yes, but at the same time, I'm conscious of the route that I run. It has some hills, some up and some down. and, you know, some starts, some stops.
Yeah.
And so I do like this, what I call variability of running.
Yeah.
It is
You're not just running on a track 4 miles.
That's right.
Day in and day out. You are still creating variability. And I think that's actually really important when we talk about this. And once again, like varying your cadence, varying your speed.
So let me ask you, when you were trying to do your right left balance, did you set your watch so you could see it while you're running?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to.
Yeah.
Because
So I actually had it. I think it was giving me like on the splits. It was actually giving me the average for the last. So I was setting my splits for every 500 meters.
Yeah.
So then I could see like the last 500 meters. I get a little beep, and I could look the last 500 meters. It was this.
Okay.
And then so I was like, okay, for the next 500 meters, I'm going to try really hard to put a little bit more pressure on my right foot to get balance.
Yep.
And I could never get it.
Right.
I got close, but it was a game. It was a game. It was,
The trick is trying to give feedback to the runner to make real-time changes. And there's been some interesting work in this. And you know, for some of the work that we've done, people have taken that and then hooked our accelerometers up to a monitor, and then the people would watch a monitor for impact. That's actually a little challenging to do. Another person has used Kelly over in New Zealand. He just did his doctoral dissertation on this work. He put watches and they vibrated, and they set the runners off, and they had to match that vibration. But what's interesting is you stop that vibration, and now it's how long will it be before they go back to their normal running style. He did have some success with changing the gait, but he had them run for a period of time and use that watch all the time to try to get that new pattern.
Yeah, it's super interesting stuff. Well, John, I think we should leave it there, because this is once again, this was great. We'll continue on and we'll have another awesome topic coming up soon. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation tonight.
Yes, me too.
I learned some stuff. I think hopefully the audience learned quite a bit as well. So this is good.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ted. And that was fun. And we'll continue this on another talk.
You got it. Okay.
All right. Thanks everybody. I'm gonna stop live stream.